I love what you're doing. I love how you're reaching out and empowering other women and other survivors.
I love everything that you stand for.
I'm here with an incredible woman, an incredible survivor and advocate, Coco Berthmann.
Well, you are changing the world, so you go, girl.
There's people like you who just charge against the darkness every day.
In a world captivated by charisma, Coco Berthmann emerged as a beacon of charm and intelligence, a young woman whose beauty seemed to radiate warmth and sincerity. With every word, she wove a haunting tale of childhood trauma, drawing her audience in with an emotional narrative that elicited deep empathy and sympathy.
She's a big spokesman now for the movement against anti-child trafficking. She's just an amazing human.
Well, we heard about Coco's story, and we were all super touched, and we just said, what can we do to help her? We felt like we wanted to do something to just thank her for being such a light, even after such a traumatizing experience.
People listened, tears in their eyes, as she painted herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control, rallying support and admiration from those who believed they were witnessing a story of resilience and strength.
Story short, we found out that she helped me as a baby, and I hang up and I called the missionaries. I was like, I need the lessons.
Oh my God,
And if you
start crying.
You realize that this young lady is an incredible hero, to be perfectly honest. I don't have any other word for it.
But beneath this captivating facade lay a chilling truth. Almost her entire life story was a carefully constructed illusion. As investigations peeled back the layers of her deceit, it became evident that she was not just the victim she painted herself to be, but a con artist and scammer who had exploited the vulnerability of others for her gain.
I don't know how you ended up watching this video, but I'm sure grateful. If you would see me on the street, you would probably think I'm the typical girl next door.
My name is Coco Berthmann, and I'm a child trafficking survivor, and I have something to say.
I'm Coco Berthmann, survivor of human trafficking. I was trafficked for the first 15 years of my life by my own family, and my main trafficker was my own mother.
She so convincingly told her stories that families opened their homes to her, rent-free. Little did they know that when they invited Coco into their homes, they were also inviting evil in.
My name is Coco, and for those who know me know that I'm a human trafficking survivor and that I am dedicating my life to fight human trafficking.
She was being raped between 10 and 50 times a day.
That's the stuff. I was lucky enough 10 years ago to get away after my sister was murdered because she wanted to talk to a teacher.
Unfortunately, at age 14, I became pregnant by one of the abusers, and it wasn't detected until later on, and an illegal abortion was performed on me. And physically, I nearly didn't survive that abortion.
I don't think you can be a human being and hear something like this and not be affected in an extreme way.
This video aims to expose her manipulations, shedding light on the reality behind her lies, and raising awareness about the emotional toll such deceit can have on those who believed in her fabricated story and did everything they could to help her. It's a reminder that sometimes evil comes in the form of a young, petite woman, seemingly championing for something heroic. It's a call to vigilance against the charming facades that can mask the most destructive intentions. This video is a deep dive into the life and the crimes of Coco Berthmann. Listener discretion is advised. Part 1. The Spiral Staircase. Coco Berthmann was born in Germany as Sandra Renata Ruf. A self-proclaimed human rights advocate, Coco painted a picture for the world of a childhood unimaginable. On the outside looking in, Coco said her life looked unremarkable. She took dance classes and horseback riding lessons. She claimed to have 3 siblings, a younger brother, and 2 older sisters. It was her older sister Anna whom she said she was closest to. Coco told the story of how her mother left her in an orphanage in Bulgaria as an infant, but when her mother realized that she could make money off of selling her infant daughter, she went back to pick her up. Coco alleged that it was behind the closed doors of their home that their nightmares began as she and her siblings were trafficked by their own mother. Coco said her earliest memories were memories of abuse and inescapable horror. Here is Coco telling her story in her own words.
I'm Coco, born and raised in Germany. I am a survivor of child trafficking and was exploited to sex trafficking as a child for the first 15 years by my family, in particular by my mother, and have escaped my trafficking on November 2nd, 2009 by running away from home. to the outside world, we really seemed like normal girls next door, and we weren't anywhere kidnapped or hidden in a dungeon like Hollywood portrays most cases of trafficking. We, went to school. I had dance lessons, but I went horseback riding, even competing in horseback riding and all the things. And yeah, just a normal childhood, and things were just different when the doors to our home closed, and that's when people came and we were exploited and abused in our home.
During her years of being trafficked, Coco said she was subjected to years of intense torture. Her stories included graphic details of being forced to witness the murder of her older sister Anna, her best friend, her person.
And when I was about 12 years old, my older sister wanted to go talk to her teacher about what's happening to us. And when that was found out by my mother, my sister was brutally murdered.
Oh my.
And I was forced to witness her murder as a quote-unquote lesson.
And that was a big moment for me that I was like, if I stay, I'm not going to be okay here.
She detailed pregnancy and a late-term abortion she was forced to endure without anesthesia and a life-threatening infection that followed.
And then at 14, I became pregnant of one of the abusers. And it wasn't detected until later on in the pregnancy, and I was about 6 months into the pregnancy, and an illegal abortion without anesthesia was performed on me, and it was a really horrific experience. And I barely survived it, and I feel really lucky that I did.
She spoke of being severely malnourished to appear younger as she aged. Despite the horrors Coco faced, she knew without a doubt that if she stayed in her situation, she wouldn't make it out alive. So she chose to run away from her home at the age of 15.
And went to sleep that night thinking that would be it. But something happened during that night, and every time I'm being asked about it, I can't really put it in words. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I felt like something was waking me up. And I woke up, and I always say it's like those 20 seconds of insane courage that I lived through, where I just knew I got to get up right now. I got to go to my closet, get my backpack. Every time I talk about it, I get chills. Throw in some clothing and go. And so I opened my door, didn't even breathe. Like I was so nervous, and we had like a spiral staircase in the house, and I walked down really quietly. I remember, and while I'm talking, it's just like being there again, my heart beating so fast. Opened my door quietly, tiptoed down the spiral staircase.
Went to my mother's wallet and took out the exact amount of money I needed for the train, which was 113 euros.
First time and last time I've ever stolen.
First and last time in my life I stole money. And I went to the door, put in my iPod back at that time, and put on Celine Dion's Taking Chances song. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and I didn't feel anything other than the cold air in my face and the music playing. And just saying that again, it's just like I start shaking. It was just so dramatic.
How long it took me to get to the bus station, and then the bus driver came, and he saw me with a backpack. He's like, "Are you going traveling?" And I looked at him, I was like, "I'm running away from home." And he's like, "Do I have to call the cops?" And me, my sassy self, I'm like, "Well, if you do, I can't run away from home, duh." And he's like, "Well, you got a point." So he let me go.
While it seems like this would be the ending of Coco's horrifying life story and the beginning of her newfound freedom, that unfortunately wouldn't be the case. Listen as Coco details the next part of her story.
At that time I was 16, and things started to get better, and I decided to, start high school. I wanted to be the first to graduate high school from my family, and I started high school and it was great. And then I said I want to do therapy to heal and just understand what has happened, and started seeing that therapist. And I'm going to make this very short because otherwise we're going to probably talk for 2 hours. With this therapist, I encountered my next abuser, and he really groomed me through therapy, then into private contact, then having me move in. And for the next 2 years, I was there. And it, became from just emotional abuse to sexual abuse. And at age 18, I escaped that situation by committing or attempting suicide. And it was really close.
Deep in the forest, Coco said her heart stopped. Miraculously, she was found by a man and his dog, with no clue how long Coco had been without oxygen. There was a race against time to save her life. The paramedics and doctors were able to get Coco's heart to start beating again, and she said she spent the next week in a coma. Despite her being without oxygen for an unknown amount of time, Coco suffered absolutely no brain damage. None. Again, a miracle.
Something happened And once I was finished, I remember just pressing that red nurse button over and over again. And I said, I need to need the police here right away. So the police came and I testified, and my first testimony was 8 hours long. It was a horrible experience, testifying.
Against Sebastian?
Yeah, and the question, because you have to tell everything in detail and they ask more, arrested him, and he was charged not guilty by insanity. And so after that, I told myself, okay, I had dreams.
Coco says that after Sebastian's arrest was when her life and freedom officially began. However, that was only the story she told publicly. Privately, wherever Coco was, chaos ensued. Part 2. The Rise of Coco Berthmann. Coco Berthmann gained widespread attention on social media by sharing a compelling narrative of surviving after being trafficked for the first 15 years of her life. Her posts, filled with emotional recounts of her harrowing experiences, resonated deeply with her audience, especially other trauma survivors. Coco's followers admired her courage and resilience, propelling her to social media stardom.
I won't just survive. Oh, you will see me thrive.
She leveraged this platform to advocate for trafficking survivors, appearing on various podcasts, multiple music videos, a TEDx talk, and public speaking events around the world. She even created a scholarship fund in her name to help trafficking survivors wishing to further their education. Her articulate and passionate advocacy garnered significant support, leading to collaborations with nonprofits and other survivor leaders dedicated to fighting human trafficking. Her TikTok videos had millions of views, and her follower count across her social media platforms exceeded 100,000. Multiple articles had been written about the tragedies she had faced in her life, the tragedies that she built her platform on, the stories you just heard. Coco's transformation from a survivor of pain and abuse to a powerful advocate for change may have seemed like a triumph to outsiders. However, beneath her polished facade lies a master manipulator and cunning predator, using her public image as a cover for the harm she truly inflicts. Coco Berthmann's Celine Dion obsession. Every time Coco Berthmann shared her story, she repeatedly mentioned Celine Dion's name. Interwoven with Coco's dramatic survival narrative was the tale of a young girl starved of love and freedom, obsessed with music and dance. She recounted how, during the abuse she and her older sister Anna endured, they created a pretend world where Celine Dion was their mother, tucking them in and singing lullabies. In one interview, Coco said, "When my sister was murdered and I witnessed it, I just kept thinking, Celine would hold me right now, and everything would be okay." Celine Dion appeared as a source of solace throughout Coco Berthmann's story. When she found the courage to run away from home at age 15, it was to the tune of Celine Dion's Taking Chances. After awakening from a coma following a suicide attempt, it was Celine Dion's Loved Me Back to Life that inspired her to fight against the man who had held her captive for 2 years. Coco has claimed to be friends with Celine Dion, stating that they spent time together at her house. She has even suggested that Celine wanted to adopt her and offer her a recording contract. To this day, Coco tags Celine Dion in every Instagram post, hoping to catch her attention. The truly disturbing part of this is that much of Coco's story has been proven to be fabricated. She was never in a coma, the therapist she claimed held her captive did not exist, and her murdered sister was a fictional creation. These tales of survival that Coco fed to the world were crafted not only to elicit sympathy and to manipulate those around her, but also as a means to manipulate, elicit sympathy from, and to get close to Celine Dion, which is highly disturbing. Part 3. The Timeline. To understand the influence and power Coco held, and how she was able to commit her fraud and crimes at the level she did, we've put together a timeline. This timeline focuses only on the beginning of her public fraud. It's important to remember that Coco's fraud goes back years before she began posting publicly on social media. For years, Coco was subjecting people, mostly women, to intense emotional manipulation and trauma. She faked multiple suicide attempts. She faked multiple assaults. She faked pregnancies and seizures. She made these women fear for her life. She used her stories to manipulate them by preying on their empathy and tugging at their heart. Despite all of the emotional abuse and pain she put those women through, she was still able to rise to influencer status and use her platform to prey on and manipulate the entire world. In 2017, Coco joined the LDS Church. While Coco was already manipulating people at this point, this begins her journey into the public eye. It was the LDS community that she set her sights on, and they delivered. With more support than she could imagine, multiple LDS families welcomed Coco into their life with open arms. Without a second thought, these families took Coco at her word and believed everything she told them. It was the perfect setting for Coco's lies to flourish and take shape into what would become a con so calculating she was able to scam people all around the world. Disclaimer: while discussing the timeline of Coco's rise to fame, it's important to remember that many of the people and organizations mentioned were also victims of Coco. She used them for their platforms and emotionally manipulated them and their audience. Each time Coco stood on a stage, she preyed on the audience in front of her. Each time her story was shared, new victims of hers were created. It's important to understand how Coco's rise was able to happen in order to prevent it from happening again. While the people and organizations mentioned were also victims of Coco, many of them chose silence and enabling when the extent of Coco's crimes came to light. For many, the simple solution was to delete all associations with Coco and stonewall or gaslight anyone who tried to ask them to address the situation. Just like any major publication that shared Coco's story without fact-checking her claims should have posted a retraction or updated the article to let the reader know that Coco's claims were proven false, anyone who had a platform or a large following and shared Coco's story had a duty to their listeners and viewers to set the record straight. Many of the trafficking survivors who were harmed by the horrifying actions of Coco were harmed again by the organizations and establishments who failed to do what was right. They did not publicly address the harm Coco caused the communities she preyed on, and did not provide resources and support for those that Coco harmed. Revisiting this timeline is also a reminder to public figures, publications, organizations, and establishments to do better to protect vulnerable populations from predators like Coco Berthmann. If you'd like to skip the timeline part of this video, please go to the 31-minute and 11-second mark. January. Coco shared her story publicly for the first time on the podcast Listen, Learn, and Love. Here, Coco planted the seeds of her public deception. Since the discovery of her fraud, her episode has been deleted. February. Coco takes over the Au Pair Weekend Instagram page. This was the beginning stages of Coco's con, but still aided in her growing public image. Coco spoke at an event for Girls Lobby to share her survivor story, in addition to sharing her journey to becoming a survivor advocate. Coco takes over the Ensign College Instagram. This further established credibility for Coco. March. KSL publishes an article sharing Coco's story as part of a 3-part series. In this article, she is announced as board director of Arise Project for Humanity. Her claims of being trafficked were not vetted prior to the publication of this article. Coco is a guest on the podcast Saints Unscripted. On this podcast, she shares her miracle conversion story to the LDS Church. This podcast was devastating to watch. The story Coco told was completely fabricated, yet these 2 podcast hosts believed her wholeheartedly. It has since been deleted. May. Coco is officially announced as the program director for Arise. This put Coco in a leadership position, working directly with vulnerable communities without adequate qualifications. Coco answers a casting call to share her life story with LDS Living. This article, and a video to follow, officially goes viral. The article didn't stay up for long, and shortly after it was published, Coco's story was proven to be false. Unfortunately, LDS Living did not post a retraction or an update to the story. They simply deleted it, not informing their readers about Coco's deception. Coco was a keynote speaker at an anti-trafficking event. This is still in the first few months of her public deception. These speaking engagements continued to give her credibility in the public eye. June. Coco told her story to a group of young girls at a girls' camp. This was just 6 months after Coco began telling her story publicly. It was later revealed that some of those girls were left traumatized after hearing the details of Coco's story. Coco was invited to share her story at a fireside in Smithville, Utah. Coco was the guest speaker at this event, and the chapel was so packed that some people had to stand in the halls to listen to her speak. August. Coco begins to post about training with Adaptive Ops. She claimed to work with the organization to rescue trafficking survivors. Coco perpetuated the rescue narrative that is harmful to survivors of trafficking. This type of narrative serves to boost the ego of those doing the rescuing and can be demoralizing and demeaning to the survivor. October. Coco was keynote speaker at an anti-trafficking event in Miami. Coco misrepresented her qualifications and was dishonest with the organization about the vetting process of her story. November. Coco throws a freedom party to celebrate escaping her traffickers 10 years before at the age of 15. This freedom party turned out to be one of Coco's biggest scams. Everything to make this party happen was donated. And Coco stood on a stage and told a story of lies to her audience, including the story of her murdered sister, Anna. Anna never even existed. Listen as Coco tells this story.
My person was my bigger sister, Anna. And she was 2 years older, and she was the one I trusted everything with, and she was my person. And I just want to point out really quick the decorations here in the room. They have special meaning. If you see on the bigger tables and over there, we have that golden cage everywhere. I lived in that golden cage. We had a really rich circumstances where I lived through, but my sister's favorite color was yellow and golden, so this is why we have it all around here. And the golden cage represents the escape, and that green is trying to go out, and from darkness comes light. And so my older sister Anna was murdered at the age of 14 because she wanted to escape human trafficking. I was 12 at that time, and I was forced to witness her being stabbed to death because she wanted to trust the teacher of what is happening at home.
Fox 13's The Place covers Coco's story, doing a live TV interview where she shared her story. As Coco's story is going viral, a group of teens came together to buy tickets for a Celine Dion concert to surprise Coco. What the teens weren't aware of was Coco's disturbing obsession with Celine and how she'd do anything, including fake a life story, to get to her. BYU announces Night with Coco. At this event, Coco tells her story and talks about being a survivor advocate. This is another example of establishments giving Coco credibility without fact-checking her claims and the stories she was telling. Revolutionary Families hosts a youth night and shares Coco's story. As Coco's story has been proven false, looking back, it is concerning how many youths were exposed to her story or told her story as a lesson of sorts. Coco's actions were predatory, and yet to the youth, she was painted as a hero. December. Coco's music video titled Child Trafficking Survivor Sings for Other Victims is released. One common theme in the music videos Coco put out was painting Coco out to be a savior for trafficking survivors, a woman who was going to save and change the world. At the end of 2019, Coco announced that she would be giving a TEDx talk in March 2020. 2019 was the year of the rise of Coco Berthmann. These engagements catapulted her into social media stardom. Her lies were sold time and time again by different organizations and platforms. January. Coco is a guest on the podcast Consider Before Consuming by the anti-trafficking organization Fight the New Drug. This once again presented Coco as a safe person to the survivors who followed and trusted this organization. February. Coco goes on counter-human trafficking rescue operations with Adaptive Ops. Coco takes these opportunities to spread conspiracy theories and misinformation surrounding trafficking. March. BYU announces Coco's upcoming TEDx talk. Due to COVID, this event will be canceled. March. Coco released her new music video, Reflection, a cover from Mulan. In her announcement with this video, Coco claims that the music video is the dream of her murdered sister. Coco said, "This is my sister's dream. She always wanted to sing." This again was a manipulation and deception of her audience. This sister never even existed. April. Coco is a guest on the Real Tales from the Road podcast. This is a 2-part episode and hails Coco as a true hero. In April of 2020, Coco announced that she started a scholarship fund in her name, the Coco Berthmann Scholarship Fund, to help trafficking survivors further their education. The scholarship fund officially launches in May, with the support of multiple organizations and well-known public figures. Coco said the logo was designed to honor the memory of her older sister she claimed was murdered in front of her. Later, we will discuss the alleged mistreatment by Coco of survivors that received this scholarship. July. Coco released another music video titled Rise. This music video was highly disturbing. The video was produced with Paul Hutchison. Together, they came up with the idea based on stories Coco told about her childhood. Once again, this video paints Coco as the savior of children. It is Coco who rescues the children in the music video. Furthermore, this video was not an accurate depiction of what child trafficking typically looks like. It further sensationalized the idea of child trafficking, making it harder for victims to be identified or survivors to identify themselves. Coco posted this video to her social media, but months later, she took it down. There was backlash over how harmful this video was to the anti-trafficking movement. July 2020. Coco is a guest on a German podcast. In this podcast, she reveals very disturbing information. Coco Berthmann mentioned that she was the initial point of contact for vulnerable survivors of trafficking when her team rescued them. This revelation is deeply concerning. Coco is quoted on the podcast saying, "I am the first person to approach the victim and speak to the victims, because there is so much hustle and bustle involved with these big guys who then make them even more scared. And then I, as a survivor, as an expert, go to build up trust. Because lots of people are scared and don't want to come with us because they don't know what's going on. Because the trust is generally broken with every person, and my job then is to go in to build up trust." Considering Coco Berthmann's history of fraud and manipulation, particularly targeting vulnerable communities, LDS women and families, her involvement poses a risk when interacting with individuals emerging from highly distressing circumstances. Organizations must improve their efforts in verifying the backgrounds and qualifications of anyone who interacts directly with trafficking survivors. August. Chris Hansen interviews Coco Berthmann. Chris stated that Coco came to him highly vetted and highly recommended. They had started to team up and work on a big television production. Chris would be one of the first people to speak out once Coco's crimes came to light. September. Coco announces collaboration with best-selling author Richard Paul Evans. Coco would go on to state she had been offered a book deal and changed her Instagram bio to include author. November. We are adding this to the timeline to highlight that multiple credible and trusted sources like Elizabeth Smart publicly supported and followed Coco on social media. Coco began to collaborate with anti-trafficking organization, Safe House Project. Often Coco was presented as an inspiration and a pillar of strength. Unfortunately, this made Coco seem like a safe and trusted person, setting many survivors up to be taken advantage of once again by Coco. January. Coco is a guest on The Skinny Confidential. It will be her appearance on this podcast that will eventually lead to the release of the 10-part series investigating Coco's entire story and history of fraud. The hosts of The Skinny Confidential did what was right, and what more organizations and platforms should have done. Dear Media gave Coco a platform that aided in her story being shared with millions of listeners. So when they learned of her history of deception and fraud, they knew it was morally right to set the record straight. Chris Hansen begins tagging Coco in posts on social media. Like The Skinny Confidential, Chris Hansen did what was right when the truth of Coco's crimes came to light. He spoke out about Coco's crimes and warned his audience of her manipulation and deception. March. Coco begins to post Instagram content with Elizabeth Smart. It would come out later that Coco would use her friendship with Elizabeth Smart and Elizabeth Fraser to manipulate people and gain the upper hand anytime someone would call her out for her lies and emotional abuse. Coco announces the title of her TEDx talk. April. Coco is one of the speakers at the Human Trafficking Policy and Education Summit, hosted by the Malouf Foundation. July. Coco speaks at a survivor fundraising event with Elizabeth Smart. Coco's continued presence in leadership roles opened up vulnerable communities that Coco easily preyed on. April. KSL publishes an article detailing parts of Coco's story. While the article has been updated to include notes about others who spoke, it has not been updated to let readers know that Coco's story has been proven as false. May. Coco is a guest on Create the Love podcast hosted by Mark Groves. While the episode has since been deleted, Mark had over 1 million followers when the episode aired. Coco appears as a guest on Elizabeth Smart's podcast Smart Talks. This episode was deleted shortly after Lynn Packer's expose detailing Coco's lies aired in August of 2021. While the episode was deleted, you can still listen with a quick Google search. August. Coco's TEDx talk officially publishes to YouTube. There was a delay in her talk being released due to discrepancies and problems fact-checking her information. In the end, BYU chose to publish it anyway. While it stayed up for a few weeks, it was eventually deleted. August. Lynn Packer's video expose is published on YouTube. This video provided a timeline of Coco's fraud and deception. It highlighted her history of emotionally manipulating those in her life and those who followed and supported her. While this expose came as a surprise to many of her followers, it didn't come as a surprise to those who had known and caught Coco in her lies for years. Many thought this would finally be the moment that Coco would be held accountable for the pain and damage she had done. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case. Shortly after Lynn's expose titled The Coco Berthmann Hoax was published, Safe House Project posted a graphic on their social media pages indirectly addressing the video. Many survivors felt betrayed and angry after they watched Lynn's video, as it became clear that Coco had been dishonest about most of her story. We spoke with survivors, and many said they reached out to the organizations Coco had partnered with to express their concerns, but that their concerns were dismissed. The dismissal of those concerns would have dire consequences for survivors and beyond, as just a few months later, Coco's lies land her in police custody, facing felony charges. Part 4. Cancer picked the wrong girl.
And I refuse to die. But the doctor said that with treatment they gave me 30% chance to live 2 to 5 years, and without 1 to 2 years. I'm not done yet. And I just refuse to give up. After everything, this is not the way I'm going out. Although it was super overwhelming to go through the emotions, like you feel it all. Yeah, so that's the update right now with cancer. It's gonna be a very intense journey, but I'm not here to give up. And cancer picked the wrong girl.
In January of 2022, Coco announced to the world that after a series of health issues, she was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, and her prognosis wasn't good. She began to update her social media near daily. Detailed Instagram posts, leading up to, announcing, and then updating everyone about how she was doing.
Thank you for all your comments and love. I really appreciate it. But you better believe homegirl is not gonna die. Not anytime soon. Because I have still some dreams that need to be fulfilled. My symptoms right now, I am in somewhat of pain, like here and there. I have fever that comes and goes. And very fatigued. I'm very, very tired, very easily. I get tired really quick. Aching. And then I have pain in the areas where they found the masses. So it looks like I have been, unfortunately, living with cancer around 2 years already.
Coco seemed excited to document her cancer journey with the world. She just knew she was going to be okay. At one point, Coco suggested that maybe, just maybe, the cancer was a good thing.
I don't know, I had the thought, what if this cancer is a good thing? What if this is the last push of my trauma to completely get out of my system and be done with it? Anyway, so I believe strongly that, I don't know, I just have a feeling it's gonna be okay. Either way.
People from around the globe came together to support the young woman who had received such dire news. Ukraine, India, Australia, Germany, Japan, and beyond. To thank them, Coco posted to let them know how they could help, financially.
If you feel, I don't know, I feel bad for asking, but if you feel called to help in any financial way, my friend started a GoFundMe. There is a link. Most of the alternative treatments are obviously not covered by insurance. I'll be okay. It'll be okay.
Coco's friend did what any good friend would do in this situation. She created a GoFundMe to rally people to join forces to help Coco fight cancer. The description of the fundraiser reads, "Our dear friend, Coco Berthmann, was just diagnosed with stage 3 mantle cell lymphoma. It's an aggressive cancer, and her prognosis is unknown at this point. But the average survival rate is 30%, with a life expectancy of only 2 to 5 years. Coco is 28 years young and is on her own with no family support. Her doctors are looking at multiple treatment options, including chemo and T-cell therapy. a newly approved treatment that will hopefully have more long-term success than chemo. Coco's life has been filled with so much trauma, and yet she has always found a way to fight through it all and triumph. She has been a source of hope to so many, especially other survivors. She has dedicated her life fighting for others. Let us now rally together and fight for Coco. She needs our help. Please join us in raising money to help offset her medical expenses. Let us show her how much we appreciate her and her efforts and that there is always hope, even in the face of cancer.
I guess, welcome to my cancer journey. Cancer picked the wrong kind of girl.
Donations and words of support poured in. First hundreds, then thousands of dollars were raised. Her posts were shared, and once again, Coco was going viral. This time, because she was in the fight for her life. And then suddenly,
New at 4, a Utah human rights advocate is being accused of lying about having cancer to solicit donations. After receiving a tip earlier this month, South Jordan police began investigating 28-year-old Coco Berthmann. She told police she received treatment for mantle cell lymphoma at the Huntsman Cancer Institute and from 2 specialists out of state. Now, police found no record of that. According to the arresting document, one of Berthmann's friends had set up a GoFundMe page after she told her she was struggling financially with her illness. It raised over $10,000. Berthmann has a link to the fundraiser on her Instagram. She was arrested on suspicion of communications fraud, which is a second-degree felony.
So, yeah, I'm gonna share this here. You can keep it, and I want to keep this life on my feed to look back on one day and looking at the beginning of my cancer journey and say, dang, I did that. I overcame that. And the cancer is gone.
Part 5. Over 6 other women have been scammed by Coco. The news of Coco's arrest made headlines around the world. To some, the news was shocking. To others, it was only shocking that it took so long for her to be caught. One thing remained clear. The truth about Coco Berthmann was emerging, and the evidence of her deception was solid. Not only was the evidence of her deception irrefutable, but the people who were victimized began to publicly tell their stories, and for the first time, the world was listening. Amanda Frisbee, Coco's former best friend, was one of the first people to speak out about Coco Berthmann's crimes. It was Amanda who created a safe place for victims to come forward and share their experiences.
Hi there. If you're new here, I was friends with a scam artist named Coco Berthmann for 2 years, and I'm just here sharing my experience. Well, friends, I received a copy of her police report, and unfortunately, it confirms our worst fears.
It is through this police report that we begin to put the pieces together, that the Coco Berthmann that existed online was not the Coco Berthmann that many had experienced behind the scenes.
I sent her a Marco Polo and said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And this was her response.
So today I am on my way to get chemo, and if you are free tonight, I would love to see you. If not, depending on how I feel, that's okay too, because I might be sicker than a dog.
For years, people around the world had fallen victim to Coco's deception, emotional manipulation, and abuse. This had been going on so long that by the time Coco was arrested, there were over 6 women who were willing to come forward to tell their stories to police about being scammed by Coco. As we stated earlier, Coco is originally from Germany. So when she moved to the US, she would often be set up with host families. These were kind-hearted people who had opened their homes and their lives to Coco. With each family that Coco stayed with, a pattern began to emerge. Coco emotionally stormed through these families' homes. What began as a kind gesture for a woman that they were inspired by and wanted to help turned into a real-life horror story. It began with emotional manipulation. Coco would keep the women in the family up all night, exhausting them, and without fail, something major with Coco would happen the next day. These women not only feared for Coco's life, but they also feared for their families' lives, some going as far as to have a security system installed to protect them. They poured their hearts into helping her, only to have Coco lie to them and take advantage of them repeatedly. Each story she told was worse than the last, from the murder of her sister to the murder of multiple children at her hands in her basement in Germany. Her intense demands overwhelmed them, but feeling for Coco, they didn't want her to feel they were abandoning her. With Coco, they faced crisis after crisis. Alerted emergencies turned out to be false alarms, and eventually, their family's well-being was at risk. The emotional torment and manipulation pervaded the households she stayed in, forcing each woman to choose between their own families and Coco, who was lying to them and scamming them.
You might remember a girl who was in my life named Coco Berthmann. She actually lived with my parents for a while, so that's how I knew her. I could go on and on about a lot of things about Coco. There is a new podcast that just came out, and my mom was actually interviewed for it. So my mom is on episode 3. They only hit like the very tip of the iceberg with my mom's story. There is so many other things that Coco did to manipulate and torment my mom. Some really scary, intense things that she put my mom through over and over again. It's a lot. She lies about a lot.
After confrontations revealing Coco's deception, she would leave one family and move to another, claiming to her new hosts that the previous family had been abusive toward her. Allegations against innocent families and individuals piled up, and despite the evidence of the emotional damage caused by Coco, people often chose to believe her version of events. Coco left a trail of trauma behind her, and eventually these women found one another. They compared stories and experiences, and quickly realized that Coco was scamming the entire world. According to these women, Coco had faked cancer numerous times before. She'd faked seizures and fainting episodes. She'd lied about multiple assaults, familial deaths, and a potential need to go into hiding or witness protection. They'd each faced and survived what they called Hurricane Coco, and it would be these courageous women who would contact the police and blow the lid off of Coco's new cancer scam. Most had even endured being falsely accused of mistreatment and cruelty toward Coco. Coco's cancer diagnosis and social media posts were going viral, and thousands of dollars were pouring in. Knowing Coco's history of deception, these women wasted no time contacting the police, and the police wasted no time contacting Coco Berthmann. The emotional turmoil and cruelty Coco subjected many of these women to was highlighted in the podcast Believable, The Coco Berthmann Story by Dear Media. We spoke to several others who weren't interviewed for the podcast who shared similar stories with us. With these women, Coco faked over a dozen assaults, as well as multiple pregnancies, miscarriages, and abortions. In the moment, these women believed her and thought Coco's life was in danger. They feared for her safety, their hearts breaking for her, and they supported her in every way possible, until it became clear that something was off. Sometimes this realization came within weeks, while for others, it took months. They took Coco at her word until it became evident that her words could not be trusted, leading them to understand what she had been doing to them all along. It wasn't just one person or one family affected. Everyone in Coco's life was hearing a different story. Each person she encountered ended up doing everything they could to help her. She would walk into a room, and every head would turn. That was what Coco loved. Once her sights were set on someone, that person would become her next target. One woman shared how she sat with Coco as she detailed horrifying things that had happened to her, holding Coco as she seemingly cried, only to find out that the story Coco was recounting couldn't possibly be true because there were witnesses to the event. One woman in the podcast described how Coco would cut her down with words, breaking her spirit until she was no longer the person she had been before Coco entered her life. A former friend of Coco's shared a similar experience, highlighting the emotional toll of their interactions.
And she goes, "I need friends who are nurturing, and I keep ending up with people like you." Yeah, she actually said that.
With every person Coco took advantage of, emotionally abusing and manipulating them, she also stole their trust and confidence. This is why so many were willing and ready to speak to the police as soon as they learned about Coco's latest cancer scam. Part 6. The Police Report. Initially, the police contacted Coco by phone to request additional information regarding her cancer diagnosis. Specifically, they needed proof of her diagnosis. Coco explained that she was too weak and ill to meet in person, but agreed to email her medical paperwork as evidence. During the same conversation, Coco, somewhat unexpectedly, mentioned that she was working with the FBI and the district attorney as an advocate and witness in a human trafficking case. The police asked for the case number and the name of the detective involved, which Coco provided. The police waited for Coco to email her records, but she never did. So they subpoenaed her records from the hospitals she claimed had diagnosed and treated her. Both hospitals reported that Coco had never been a patient there. The police also contacted the FBI, who confirmed that Coco was not, and had never been involved in any cases with them. As the police built their case against Coco, she became increasingly agitated. Instead of coming clean to those closest to her, she chose to double down on her deceit. Rather than feeling remorseful for lying and causing harm, she was angry that people questioned her cancer diagnosis. When confronted, without accusations, Coco repeatedly said, "This is why survivors don't come forward," which was an attempt to manipulate the situation. All that had been requested was proof of her cancer diagnosis, which she was unable to provide. People quickly began to realize how dishonest she was being.
This whole time, I'm still grieving the fact that my friend might die. Then, she finds out that she's being investigated by the police because someone put in an anonymous tip that she was lying about having cancer and that she had lied about being a human trafficking survivor as well. And she freaked out. She got super suicidal and just started saying things like, "I don't want to be in this world. This is why survivors never come forward. Like, we're never believed. I hate these guys." And like, yeah, that would suck if it were true. But like, this isn't about sexual assault. This is about cancer, something that is very easily provable. Like, you just show your medical records and voila, this all goes away.
As Coco's inner circle began to realize they were being duped, they reached out to her. One saying, "It's important to recognize that people are in a really tough spot right now. They love you, they want to support you, and have your back against the world. But they can only do that if they know what they're supporting. Cancer is not like sexual assault. It's not your word against someone else's. Cancer is easily proven. If you've had all of the blood tests, biopsy and PET scans you say you have, then you have proof of cancer, and your support group will weather all of this with you. Not showing any proof, to even your inner circle, is pretty convincing that you don't have it to show. And there is no choice but to assume you don't have cancer. I think it's not unreasonable for anyone to assume that until shown otherwise. I'm sure your support system will help you get the help you need, whether that be cancer care or psychiatric. I know you're hurt and angry, but your support group is too. I think you fix it if you either 1, prove you've had cancer all along, or 2, let your people know why it went as far as it did, and be willing to get some psychiatric help to work through it." Coco continued to deny the allegations against her, and she was adamant that she absolutely had cancer. She was even more adamant that anyone questioning her was actually the problem, not her. At one point in the police report, the officer states he asked Coco why anyone would make the accusation that she was faking her cancer. Coco responded that she was testifying against certain individuals and believed they were striving to tarnish her reputation to make her seem not credible. The police report then states, "After my initial conversation with Coco, she contacted me via telephone. Coco began by asking me if it would help having anyone who had been with her during the time of her hospital visits to speak with me. I informed Coco the best course of action would be to view her medical records in order to confirm if there was a diagnosis for cancer. I also advised her I would be applying for a warrant to obtain any medical documents pertaining to her medical history. Coco then informed she would send any documentation she had. When Coco failed to email medical records to the police, they eventually showed up to her apartment. When confronted with direct evidence of her deception to police, she continued to lie to them. Eventually, the evidence was clear. Coco didn't have cancer, so she was arrested. After her arrest, Coco downplayed her involvement in the cancer scam by claiming it was part of an elaborate suicide plan.
And so she gets arrested. So all of her friends in her close circle are kind of waiting for her to give an explanation of like, what the hell is going on, you know? She just kept saying all these excuses and all of us were kind of like, things aren't adding up. Finally, I'm able to talk to her, but basically she said that this was all some extravagant plan for her to just eventually commit suicide, which doesn't make any sense. So she says, yeah, I faked cancer because it was this whole extravagant plan to kill myself without my friends feeling bad or like they could have done more or something like that. Which makes absolutely no sense because like the second she actually did die, we would all know that she never had cancer, right? And also, she was the type of person who threatened to kill herself like every 5 minutes. Not that you shouldn't take it seriously, but she had a history of doing things like that to get attention.
She also suggested that the arrest was merely a media stunt. Coco further asserted that since she hadn't started the GoFundMe campaign, she wasn't truly at fault. Additionally, she falsely claimed that she had not touched any of the money donated for her cancer treatment. Coco's arrest was far from a mere misunderstanding. She was arrested on charges of communications fraud, a second-degree felony. In total, she raised $20,000, and astonishingly, the charges did not even cover the personal donations she received. After Coco publicly claimed financial hardship due to a cancer diagnosis, a friend launched a GoFundMe campaign on her behalf. Coco not only promoted the fundraiser via her social media, but she also solicited additional donations through her personal PayPal and Venmo accounts. It's evident that she accessed these funds directly. The police report, which included a subpoena of her bank records, revealed expenditures on luxury items such as hair products, Chick-fil-A, Apple products, clothing, makeup, and more. Even after her arrest, Coco continued to misuse the funds. Initially charged with communications fraud, Coco eventually pled guilty to a lesser misdemeanor. She was required to reimburse only GoFundMe and serve a brief probation period. The police only investigated her for the GoFundMe fraud, but given Coco's history of deception and the blatant misuse of funds, it would have been wise for the police to further investigate Coco's financial history. For example, there was never an investigation into the survivor fundraisers that Coco would do intermittently on her social media. She would often tell her followers she had connected with a survivor who recently left a bad situation, or she'd ask for donations for special occasions like Mother's Day or back to school. When investigative journalists investigated these fundraisers that Coco did, there was only one occasion where they could verify the funds actually went to survivors as Coco claimed. One survivor we spoke to alleged that Coco had accidentally admitted to using some of the donated funds raised for survivors on Mother's Day to buy clothing, home decor, and a camera for herself. The police also failed to investigate the history of Coco's deception and the thousands of dollars that families spent on her under false pretenses. One survivor made a post on Instagram alleging that Coco had confided to their group that she was sexually assaulted by a high-ranking Utah politician, so the FBI was putting her into witness protection in New York City. She asked people to help pay for her urgent move to NYC. She gave this survivor a list of money she needed for food, rent, and utilities. When speaking to other people about the urgent situation, this survivor found out that Coco had been asking multiple other people to give her money as well. Stunned to realize the magnitude of Coco's deception, this survivor asks, "How can you be so injurious, so deceitful, so evil?" Despite the severity of her actions, Coco has never publicly addressed the cancer scam or apologized to the thousands she deceived, including the trafficking survivors she exploited. With increased attention, people from various backgrounds, many from the LDS community, mothers with families, and trafficking survivors, are speaking out about how Coco scammed them. Her exploitation of vulnerable individuals, including survivors of trafficking, is the heart of this story. Originally, over 6 women were prepared to expose Coco Berthmann's deceit to law enforcement. Today, that number has grown to dozens. Coco's crimes weren't just financial scams. In fact, they went much deeper. They were emotional scams that preyed upon the vulnerability of trauma survivors and the kindness of people who wanted to do good and help others. A Reddit user whose name we have disguised came forward to tell a troubling story that took place in late 2023. The Reddit user said, "I was looking for applicants in care.com for full-time help. I have disabled children who require a lot of help. She told me that she had experience with autistic children. I set up an in-person interview. She knew all the right things to say. I called her recommendations: former bishop, current family she was nannying for, and the family in St. George who took her in. They withheld any information when directly asked, even though I expressed concern from having nonverbal children. Care deleted her profile after a few days because she didn't pass the background check. She had great recommendations, so again, no red flags. The issues I had when she was working was constant talk about her abuse in front of my children. Offhand and rude comments assuming wealth. Odd and inappropriate comments about personal things. She was trying to get a new car and lied about how much I would be paying her. We pay nannies as paid employees with taxes, and she freaked out because she wanted to be paid under the table. My former nanny was helping transition, and she is the one who called me and sent me the articles and reports. We let her go that day. We called one of her references and asked her former bishop if he knew, and he said yes. He knew everything. He thought she would have been honest. So I told him how many times she had lied to me. I felt such a betrayal of trust, because my kids can't tell me how they are being treated. She should not be near children in any capacity. She has not learned anything and has made zero efforts to change her behavior. And another Reddit user claimed that Coco tried to apply to work for their family under a false name. Throughout her time caring for children and working around children, there are questions and incidents that need to be addressed. Allegedly, while children were in her care, she was simultaneously faking multiple suicide attempts, faking multiple assaults, and fainting episodes. Additionally, in Dear Media's coverage of Coco's fraud, it was found that children who had heard Coco tell her story, extremely graphically at a camp for girls, were left traumatized with nightmares. Another incident surrounds Coco's inappropriate behavior with a teenager, where she licked the side of a young girl's face on camera. This behavior was called out by the teen's mom, and the call-out made Coco angry. With all of these alleged incidents put together, it paints a dire picture, one that shouldn't be overlooked or passed by. Part 7, The Long Con. In August 2021, before Coco was even arrested, journalist Lynn Packer's exposé on Coco Berthmann was released. In the video, he presented credible evidence of Coco's deception, proving many of her stories false. He was the first journalist to fact-check and investigate Coco. Despite this exposé, many people continued to attribute her inconsistencies to her trauma, with some organizations even defending her on social media. Yet those who had been scammed by Coco for years, going as far back as 2017, knew that it was only a matter of time before Coco was finally caught. In typical Coco fashion, between August 2021, after Lynn's exposé was released, and February 2022 when she was arrested, she made at least 9 public social media posts wherein she was facing a crisis of some sort. Then, after her arrest, Dear Media launched the podcast, Believable, The Coco Berthmann Story, where a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist fact-checked and thoroughly investigated Coco's stories. She also found that Coco had lied about most of the claims she made, like the story of her murdered sister Anna. Anna never existed. Coco's only 2 siblings are alive and well. The story about the illegal abortion, also proven false. The therapist named Sebastian that held her in his basement, simply not true. With Coco's story being shared via reputable podcasts like The Skinny Confidential and Elizabeth Smart's podcast, Smart Talks, most couldn't imagine the emotionally abusive behaviors and deception she was engaged in behind the scenes. Yet for years, Coco had subjected multiple families, women, and survivors to emotional torment, and some of them hadn't been listened to, or didn't feel heard. Some felt completely alone, unable to make sense of all that she had done to them. Emotional abuse hides in the cracks. Sometimes we gaslight ourselves and tell ourselves it's not that bad. Yet as our lives are untangled from the person who is causing us harm, we find a leftover imprint of pain and trauma. Fears we didn't have before surfaced, and only when we fully escape do we realize the scope of the damage that was caused. Emotional abuse is abuse, and there is no circumstance wherein it is okay or acceptable to cause such extreme damage to another individual, much less multiple people. Multiple trafficking survivors have come forward to allege that Coco had befriended them via social media or through the organizations they worked with. Feeling that Coco could understand their struggles in life, they opened up to her and shared their stories with her. What they'd soon find out is that bits of the stories Coco would share on social media would suddenly reflect the experiences they shared with her. Essentially, she was stealing their stories and making them her own. Time and time again, survivors would confront her, only to suddenly be blocked. One survivor shared with us that when Coco blocked her after being confronted, she also lost access to the organization Coco was working with. She lost the support and resources she desperately needed. It's important to remember that Coco had a platform, and many of these survivors didn't, nor did they have access to the resources and reach that Coco had. When a woman who had harmed them was seen working for and promoted by organizations meant to make them feel safe, they felt like their sense of community and safety was once again violated. A few survivors told us that they reached out to organizations to let them know what was happening with Coco. They said that they weren't believed and felt gaslighted by the organizations. While some organizations distanced themselves from her, others acted as if nothing had happened. Many survivors we spoke with expressed frustration over the lack of prioritization for their safety. The more survivors we connected with and spoke to, the more we began to understand that these situations with Coco and how she mistreated other survivors were not a rare occurrence. Not only did Coco prey on trafficking survivors, but she also preyed on anti-trafficking organizations and used them to further facilitate her lies. As Coco rose to fame, so did her victim count. No one was safe from her lies and accusations. It goes without saying that survivors of trafficking deserve spaces in which they will be safe from predators and safe to receive care and support. When con artists and scammers like Coco Berthmann enter the space, it can have long-lasting negative impacts on those in the community that will be felt for years. This isn't a case of someone just lying to people, which in and of itself is terrible. But this is a case of someone who used their power to take advantage of, take from, groom survivors to gain their trust, and then exploit their truth that they had shared with Coco. This is someone who used survivors to elicit sympathy for herself, and used survivors to raise funds for herself. This is someone who re-traumatized people who have already been traumatized enough in their lives. When Coco announced her scholarship fund for survivors, even then, recipients were not safe from Coco's manipulation and mistreatment, as a few recipients have spoken about their negative experience with Coco and the scholarship fund. When survivors speak up about the harm Coco has caused them, they should not be told to feel sympathy or empathy for the person who caused them pain. For many survivors, the pain and fallout from Coco's actions continue to affect them even years later. Human trafficking is very real, and survivors have a higher chance of being re-victimized again after they've gotten out of their trafficking experiences. What Coco did was absolutely a re-victimization of trafficking survivors, and to date, their victimization has never been publicly addressed. The return of Coco Berthmann. After Coco's arrest in 2022, she went quiet on social media. While she continued to post, her activity decreased significantly. Just before the release of Dear Media's podcast detailing her crimes, Coco deleted her TikTok and Instagram accounts entirely. Although she was silent online, she was vocal behind the scenes, sharing her opinions about the podcast and how she felt about the true story finally being told. In late 2023, a recorded conversation featuring Coco surfaced. In the recording, she attempts to discredit anyone who was interviewed for the podcast while simultaneously portraying herself as the victim. She shows no accountability for the thousands she deceived and the dozens she traumatized. It was no surprise when Coco Berthmann returned to social media just months after the podcast concluded. What was surprising, however, was her demeanor. She acted as if nothing had ever happened, like she did absolutely nothing wrong. Where she continues to manipulate and evade responsibility. She has reverted to the same behaviors she engaged in before her arrest, posting heavily photoshopped images with often plagiarized inspirational captions, while disabling comments to prevent others from warning her followers about her crimes. This prevents anyone from speaking out about the intense emotional pain and manipulation she inflicted on many of the communities that surrounded her. Coco's online presence does not reflect the reality of who she is, the crimes she has committed, or the harm she is capable of. Her actions reveal a continued lack of remorse and a tendency to see herself as a victim rather than a perpetrator. For many, her behavior has been not just cruel, but also evil. Part 8. That's not even her dancing. Coco's manipulation and deception have spanned over a decade, targeting members of the LDS community, trafficking survivor communities, and chronic illness communities. By manipulating people into believing in false stories or deceptive schemes, Coco eroded the foundational trust that people placed in her, often leading to long-term emotional and psychological repercussions. The emotional scars can be long-lasting, some even lifelong. In addition to the larger deceptions Coco has told in her personal life and online, there are also numerous smaller lies she has been perpetuating for years. These smaller lies can still be found scattered throughout her social media posts. For instance, Coco frequently talks about her love for dance and posts videos and photos that appear to show her dancing beautifully. However, none of these videos or photos feature Coco. A reverse image search easily identifies the photos, while the videos belong to dancers like Autumn Miller and others, who were minors at the time they were posted. Coco, an adult, recorded and uploaded these videos to her large platform. While this might seem trivial, it is significant, given that Coco built her platform on the premise of being a survivor of child trafficking, and often discussed graphic abuse involving children. The use of these videos on her platform, without the parents' consent, is highly inappropriate, as these videos and images incorrectly attach those labels to the children featured in those videos. Additionally, Coco has used stolen photos without crediting the original photographers, misrepresenting them as her own. She has also plagiarized captions written by BIPOC and disabled authors, repeatedly using their words without attribution. Many people praised Coco's writing and photography, unaware that these works were not hers. Coco also continued to contribute to the culture of unrealistic beauty standards and promoted sick and unhealthy body types by heavily photoshopping all of her images so she would appear smaller. This distortion can lead followers to develop skewed perceptions of their own bodies and engage in harmful behaviors in an attempt to emulate these unattainable standards. The relentless pursuit of such altered ideals can foster unhealthy eating patterns and exacerbate disordered eating conditions, as individuals strive to achieve a physique that aligns with the digitally manipulated images they see online. When Coco posted her photoshopped images to appear skinnier and sicker, she inadvertently contributed to the proliferation of pro-anorexia content online. Such actions reveal a disconnect between the influencer's public persona and their actual practices, compromising the integrity of the body positivity movement and potentially exacerbating issues related to body image and eating disorders. The lies and the true story of Coco Berthmann. Coco Berthmann's true story may never be fully revealed. Instead of sharing her actual experiences, she fabricated narratives and stories that weren't hers to tell. While some events she described are real things that happened to people, they did not happen to her. Rather than breaking the cycle of abuse, she perpetuated it, preying on those who supported her. Her siblings vehemently deny her claims of trafficking, insisting nothing of the sort occurred. Additionally, childhood acquaintances and public records confirm she never had a sister named Anna, who was murdered. Claims of an illegal abortion, a week-long coma, and being held captive by a therapist have all been disproven by official records. Upon moving from Germany to the US, Coco's falsehoods escalated. She subjected people to fabricated crises, lied about numerous assaults, and feigned illnesses time and time again. Fainting episodes perfectly timed to aid in her false narratives. Although many believe she may have experienced some form of abuse in her childhood, her ongoing behavior has turned her narrative irrelevant. She has continued the cycle of abuse, manipulating and lying to those around her. Throughout her life, numerous individuals have recounted experiences of being deceived and exploited by her, people who don't even know each other telling the exact same stories. Coco's ability to deceive for so long was enabled by continual excuses rooted in her trauma. Each time she was caught in a lie or accused innocent people, the response was often, "It's due to her trauma." This narrative provides an out for Coco, enabling her rather than holding her accountable for her crimes. This pattern has allowed her to evade responsibility for over a decade. Trauma is never an excuse to abuse others. Never. Every time Coco is to be held accountable for the pain and trauma she has subjected others to, or her bad behavior, she finds a way to continue to elicit sympathy and empathy to avoid accountability. And it's clear from her pattern of behavior that she's skilled at using trauma and crises to elicit compassion and avoid accountability. This, in and of itself, is an emotional manipulation. While Coco's true life story may remain unknown, we do know that she has consistently misrepresented herself and caused significant emotional and psychological harm to her victims. There is no justification for the suffering she has inflicted for over 10 years. Her stories were false, but the pain she caused is very real. Is Coco Berthmann a psychopath?
I think she's definitely got some of the characteristics of a psychopath. People assume that psychopaths are just people that commit unspeakable violence. Actually, that's not the case. Psychopath is charming, conning, manipulative, deceitful. They lack empathy. They don't care about the rights and wrongs of other people. So Coco, as I'm sure you'll agree, is pretty much all of those things. As far as I can tell, Coco's only really got one modus operandi, which is basically lying.
This question has been asked repeatedly. How can someone who has hurt and traumatized so many act as if they did nothing wrong while continuing the same harmful behavior? How can a person who has caused so much pain lack empathy or remorse? How can they still play the victim despite having victimized so many others? While we aren't qualified to determine whether Coco is a psychopath, we can share insights from our research on some characteristics of female psychopaths. It's worth noting that most people who meet Coco initially describe her as charismatic, beautiful, and charming. This impression starkly contrasts with their later descriptions of her as cruel, manipulative, and calculating. Most psychopaths are portrayed as violent, dangerous criminals who cannot feel empathy or remorse, but female psychopaths often don't fit this profile. Female psychopaths are less physically violent, commit fewer crimes, and also show different traits than male psychopaths. Female psychopaths develop relationships with their victims. One of the traits of a female psychopath is the tendency to form relationships with the people they victimize. While male psychopaths usually target strangers, females are much more likely to victimize people they know. Female psychopaths use indirect forms of aggression. While male psychopaths are prone to physical aggression, female psychopaths use relational aggression like gossiping, excluding people, or forming alliances against someone. Some may even threaten to self-harm in order to manipulate other people. Female psychopaths play the victim card. One of the unique traits of female psychopaths is their tendency to present themselves as a victim in order to get attention, pity, or to emotionally manipulate others to get what they want. In some cases, female psychopaths paint themselves as victims to avoid getting in trouble or being held accountable for their actions. This is another form of manipulation and deceit. Female psychopaths use deceptive tactics to get what they want. While male psychopaths are more violent and direct in taking what they want from people, female psychopaths tend to rely more on deception. For example, it's much more common for female psychopaths to be arrested for fraud or extortion, rather than for physical or sexual assault. These kinds of crimes highlight the deceptive and cunning nature of the female psychopath, who may come up with elaborate cover stories and lies to con or manipulate people. Psychopath females are often more social, and some even have a true desire to be accepted by people. The problem is that because they tend to also be cruel and impulsive, they are unable to maintain healthy, lasting relationships. Instead, they are more likely to sabotage their relationships by victimizing those closest to them. Female psychopaths are very good at pretending. Psychopaths and sociopaths both can use superficial charm or charisma to lure people close to them, but women may be better at this than men. For example, male psychopaths tend to display more narcissism, but female psychopaths often seem friendly, charming, and even passive at first. The deceptive tactics used by a female psychopath makes them harder to detect and more successful at forming relationships. Unfortunately, they will often end up using, abusing, or taking advantage of those who they end up getting close to. Psychopaths have the most severe form of antisocial personality disorder and are dangerous because they lack the ability to feel empathy or remorse. While female psychopaths tend to be less physically violent, they are still dangerous people who are very likely to lie, steal, cheat, and manipulate other people. Part 9. Silence is complicity. Dozens of podcasts, publications, organizations, and influencers helped elevate Coco Berthmann, providing her a platform that she used to manipulate and scam thousands. Yet, only 3 of these have issued statements or taken action to condemn her crimes and address the harm she has caused. Most have remained silent, or even defended the platform they provided her, choosing to only see Coco Berthmann as a victim rather than the perpetrator she is, rather than acknowledging and condemning the years of harm and trauma she's caused. When individuals or organizations provide a platform to someone who later proves to be a scammer or emotional abuser, they often face a moral and ethical dilemma. The initial intent may have been to offer support or amplify a voice they believed needed to be heard, but when it becomes clear that the individual in question has used their platform to perpetuate lies and harm, silence or inaction becomes a tacit endorsement of that behavior. By failing to speak out against the damage inflicted, those who amplified Coco's platform inadvertently become complicit in the ongoing suffering of her victims. It is imperative for anyone in a position of influence to actively denounce harmful actions and take responsibility for the consequences of their endorsements. To ignore the fallout is to neglect the duty of ensuring that platforms are not used to exploit and manipulate vulnerable audiences. Furthermore, while understanding a person's traumatic past can offer context, it does not absolve them of responsibility for their actions. Emotional abuse and deceit, regardless of their origins, cause real and lasting damage. Victims of scams and emotional abuse are left grappling with their pain, and the perpetrators must be held accountable for the harm they have caused. A person's supposed traumatic past should never be used as a shield against the responsibility of addressing and rectifying the suffering they have inflicted upon others. Those who amplify the voices of individuals like Coco, a person with a history of deceit or extreme emotional manipulation, must be prepared to address the consequences when things go awry. Silence in the face of harm is not a neutral stance, but an endorsement of the destructive behavior. Addressing and rectifying the fallout from such situations is essential to prevent further victimization and to uphold ethical standards in any platform or community. Part 10. The real injustice is the lack of justice for the survivors of Coco Berthmann. Despite the truth of Coco's deception, the irrefutable proof that she has been lying to, scamming and emotionally manipulating people around the world for years, Coco has chosen to pretend like she did nothing wrong. When someone emotionally abuses and scams a large number of people, and then refuses to take accountability or acts as if nothing happened, the emotional damage inflicted on their victims is compounded by the lack of acknowledgement and justice. This denial of responsibility can deepen the trauma experienced by those who have been wronged, as it invalidates their suffering and dismisses their attempts to seek closure. Coco's refusal to address the harm she has caused not only prolongs the recovery process, but also undermines her victims' trust in others and their ability to feel secure in future friendships or relationships. Coco Berthmann's refusal to address and rectify the harm done ensures that the emotional toll extends far beyond the immediate impact, leaving lasting damage on those she scammed, manipulated, abused, and harmed. It is crucial to recognize the far-reaching effects of Coco's insidious behaviors and to support those who have been negatively impacted by her. Coco's posts since returning to social media speak volumes. She's created a world in which she is still playing the inspirational heroine, but what's different than before is that now there's awareness. Now, when people Google her name, Coco Berthmann's true story is known. This won't stop her completely, but at the very least, it gives people a chance. A warning. A reminder that this person is not a safe person, and that this person did horrible things to people, and has no remorse for her crimes. As a society, we must remain vigilant against the pervasive threat of emotional manipulation and scams, advocating for preventive measures and resources to mitigate their impact. By doing so, we can help ensure that those who have suffered are not left to bear the weight of their trauma alone, and that the path to recovery is made as accessible and compassionate as possible. A few brave trafficking survivors got together to write an open letter to Coco Berthmann and have permitted us to share their letter.
We are writing to you not out of spite, but from a place of profound reflection and healing. For many years, you manipulated, deceived, and exploited our community. You preyed upon our vulnerabilities, turning our trust into a weapon against us.
We want to be clear about the impact of your actions, and we hope this letter serves as a means of confronting the pain you've inflicted.
You are more than just a con artist and scammer. You are a predator who took advantage of individuals already suffering under the weight of exploitation. The financial burdens you imposed were a small fraction of the emotional toll your crimes took.
By presenting yourself as a source of hope and help, you wove a web of deceit that conned thousands, leading us to believe that you were a safe person that we could trust.
Leading us to believe that we could open up to you because you had our best interests at heart, but you betrayed us.
Your betrayal was not merely a matter of lost money and incredible deceit. It was the theft of our hope and the deepening of our fears. The emotional scars you left behind are a testament to the depth of your manipulation.
Many of us are still grappling with the aftermath of your deceit, trying to rebuild lives and trust in organizations that you shattered. We want you to understand the gravity and detrimental impact of your actions. Each time you took advantage of someone's trust, you further subjected us to the cycles of trauma that define the lives of many trafficking survivors.
Your actions contributed to a culture of mistrust and despair, making it even harder for us to seek the support and recovery we so desperately needed.
We hope you reflect on the harm you've caused and the pain you've inflicted. True understanding of the impact of your actions might be beyond your reach, as you've remained silent without apologies and acknowledgement of the suffering you have caused us.
Your return to social media has been a display of the same harmful behavior you've engaged in the entirety of your public persona. Still, it is our hope that you will recognize the suffering you've perpetuated.
We have found strength and solidarity in each other, and we continue to move forward with resilience and hope for a future where such exploitation is no longer tolerated.
This letter is not a call for vengeance, but a plea for acknowledgement and change. We wish for you to understand the depth of the damage you caused, and we hope that in doing so, you might begin to see the broader implications of your actions.
For those still struggling, we stand together. While many of us had our pain trivialized by organizations and public figures that supported and promoted Coco, our stories matter.
We are healing.
Reclaiming our voices
and working toward a future where such scam artists and predators are kept from sacred survivor spaces.
Our strength lies in our unity
and our determination to overcome.